This is Sonic Vibrations, and I am Michael McMillan. Nationally and internationally acclaimed artists, sound system practitioners and scholars Sonia Boyce, Leeming, Denise Noble, Yassmin Foster and Lisa Palmer come together here to talk about women's absence and presence in sound system culture, lovers rock and sound. I was conscious of how my male presence might affect the space. So with this in mind, I simply introduced the session, press record, and let the conversation take its natural course.
Hi everyone, I'm Sonia Boyce.
Hi Sonia.
Hiya, I'm an artist. I've been an artist showing for over 30 years. Also, as soon as I left college, I started teaching in art schools. So I'm now a professor of Black Art and Design at University of the Arts London. I've been doing a project called the Devotional Series, which I've been doing since 1999, charting a history of women of colour in the music industry. Lots of singers are in this kind of roll call that I've been gathering through kind of collective memory. So people give me information about performers. I have an archive, which one day I hope will become a museum. Some of that work was shown in an exhibition called Sounds Like Her, which started off in Nottingham at the New Art Exchange. It was a group exhibition of women artists who use sound or sonic art. And that's where the conversation with Michael and myself began, talking about that exhibition, the publication that came out of that, and the kind of systemic amnesia that there is around women who make noise.
My name's Leeming. I've been an artist probably about 30 years actually. Initially I started as community work and then I moved into being a singer-songwriter, musician, mainly making house music. So I was very much wedded to electronic music, but I also play keyboards and I'm also a percussionist. I got involved in being a poet. I'm a published poet and playwright. We've had various plays produced, but I also make film. I'm a film director. I'm also a performer, an actor. I don't think I've missed anything here. Oh, currently I'm a part-time lecturer at De Montfort University, performing arts, and that covers everything really around the performing arts, including digital art, film, music, dance, the whole shaboodle really. And then I have curated various exhibitions, things around fashion. I did a companion exhibition with the V&A Black British Style when that was touring. I did a companion exhibition here in Leicester that I curated. Very much a multidisciplinary artist, and I've also worked a lot sort of collaboratively with people. I actually like working collaboratively, so I think that's pretty much me. Jill of all trades, but pretty good at all of them.
Hi, my name is Denise Noble. I'm an educationalist. I've been involved in education both at the community level. That's where I began in a Black Access course. Then I became a full-time academic, teaching media studies, sociology, cultural studies, African American and African studies in the US, and then more recently, Black studies here in the UK. My work centrally is around race, gender and sexuality, particularly in relation to Black popular culture. I've had a few articles on dancehall in the past. It's interesting to hear, Sonia, your reference to systemic amnesia, because one of the themes in what I'm writing for this project is about what Gail Lewis has called the absent presence of Black women in sound system culture. So I'm very interested also in that theme of women being extremely present, but there's a kind of absence of women in the social conscience, you might say, of the sound system.
My name is Yassmin. I'm an academic. I'm a lecturer at Middlesex University. I teach, I'm going to use urban dance practices very loosely. I'm a researcher. I'm currently looking at Lovers Rock. I was infused by Sonia after working with her to go ahead with her PhD, and I did, and I've been doing it now 2 years part-time. I'm at Goldsmiths. I'm looking at Lovers Rock dance. My question at the moment is the kinetic architecture of Black bodies in the 1970s and 80s. I'm also a sound system woman. Since 2011, I should say, so 9 years, with 2 of my sisters. I am the selector and operator. One of my sisters is an MC, one of my sisters is a DJ. We've inherited our father's sound system. His sound system was Joe 90 high power in the early 80s.
Thank you, Yassmin. So, Lisa?
I would describe myself as an academic, but also I'm interested in archives. So my background before I moved into higher education was as a community public librarian. I used to work at Birmingham Central Library as what they call a content development officer, which was basically looking after the website, but it also allowed me to explore a lot of the archival material that was held in that library and how important it is in terms of documenting the histories of African Caribbean communities, particularly Vanley Burke's work. So I've written about Vanley's work and way in which it was part of a discursive field, if you like, of understanding what it meant to use Birmingham, and particularly Handsworth in Birmingham, as a space to produce knowledge about Black communities. And then I also have written about Lovers Rock music because I was interested in the politics of looking at Black love, using bell hooks' idea of love and Blackness, and trying to put a different spin on it, if you like, from a diasporic, particularly Caribbean diasporic perspective. Touching on what Sonia has spoken about, the idea of the erasure, and also the idea that Lovers Rock wasn't political, that it was apolitical. And I'm trying to bring in the idea that it actually, the politics is right there. It's a kind of sexual politics that's left unexplored. And that's really how I enter into that discussion, is looking at the sexual politics, the gendered politics. I've been trying to write a book for the longest of time on the subject.
I might actually kick off with just a few things to get going. What I didn't say, which I'll say now, is that, especially seeing Lorna G, as I knew her over the weekend, it just brought everything back. I actually started off in a sound system in Leicester, and I was encouraged by Sister Nancy and through a friend of mine who was already a singer on the sound system, and we were both singing over Studio One dub plates, but also I became an MC and I was toasting on the mic. So I do have that background, and I've got lots of things to say about what it's like to be 2 women with a group of men in a sound system touring around. I remember back in the 80s that we brought sister culture to Leicester. I was involved in a women and girls project called Ajani Women's Centre, and she came and brought the sound system and played at the centre. But this was quite historic because we took her to the local blues and blew everyone's mind. And this is etched in my mind forever. A lot of my friends felt that Lovers Rock, as I think it was Lisa said, was very apolitical and a bit wash-washy. I love Jean Adebiambo and Jackie Kay, all those people. Mm. And often there was the kind of sexism and misogyny that we came across if we came across a big Rasta dub sound system, because the sound system I was in was quite high-tech. It was very inclusive of women. It was trying to be very progressive. It had all the latest technology. So there was that kind of clash in terms of sound system culture. But even now, that still remains in terms of divisions as to, we notice a lot of women don't go round, where I've been anyway, to the heavy dub sessions as much as they're more likely to go to a sound system that's known for playing New York style or Lovers Rock. So we have some delineations here about how women participate both as consumers. But if you're talking about operators, selectors, MCs, or the financial powerhouse or the person who's driving the sound system, still the women where are they? They're sort of thin on the ground. So I just contribute that at this stage.
Carol, what's been your experience as someone who's involved in a sound system, as a woman in that arena?
Well, when we used to play out, whether we were around the Midlands or further afield, I mean, guys would just stand and stare, literally with their mouths open, and they were saying, "Well, which one of them Monday is your man in the song?" They just thought we were the girlfriends, and we were like, "Well, actually, we're here to sing." And I chant the mic. I stand with those guys in a circle, because that's the culture, and we pass the mic round. And we used to slaughter other sound systems because we had a great selector, we had a great selection of music. The guy who owned the sound system broke barriers as well because he was actually a white man. So they looked at this sound system with the white man who owned it. He wasn't on the sound. He had all black people playing on the sound, but he owned it and he was there standing how they do, this is my sound. And there's these women singing, and these women are on the mic chatting and chanting down and carrying on. I still go to Jashaka, some of the big sound systems, and I'm aware so much that women sort of pull themselves in and pull themselves into the wall, and they never go out in the middle of the floor and jump up and down and shack out, like the men do. And there's still this kind of contestation of space, never mind the selection of the music. And the music itself often is the man singing about man ting. And, so I still think there's a lot of sexism. There's a lot of demarcating of space and lines and what you're supposed to do and what you're not supposed to do. I mean, of course, if I like the music, I'm just in the middle of the dance floor going like crazy. I don't care who's looking, that's me. But, I'm really aware that the sisters are just kind of peeling back. And I'm saddened by that, actually, in 2020, 2019, that women often in the dance hall, in the session, still don't feel that they can really shack out. I've yet to come across mic chanters or selectors and operators who are women.
Because I think there might be a bit of a generational and time frame difference between you and Yassmin.
Yeah, I think I'm getting a do-over experience. So I had the experience when I was between the ages of 6 and 11 of standing and watching adults perform what felt like a very ritual way of moving in the dance space, holding up the walls as if the building's going to fall down, but still having a circularity to how we fill space, and then filling as close to the sound system as possible, depending on if there's one or two, where you stand, in accordance to the speaker boxes, and also where people stand in accordance to the speaker boxes, how well the speaker boxes are balanced. I mean, you should be able to stand right up next to a speaker box. It shouldn't give you any form of feeling that is of discomfort. You should be able to stand it, unless you're going to Jashaka or Abashanti. That's different. That's completely different. So you've also got to know where you're going to listen to something. And little things like how the boxes have been stacked, I've paid attention to, where you allow people to put their cup if you want them to. They will always find a space on your speaker box to put a cup. Even if there's no space, people have shifted the boxes a little bit to the side just to put their cup there. I remember having one experience which I felt was my own experience, and it reminds me of Sonia's, is it wallpaper? Wallpaper. I remember I had a 16th birthday party and my dad had just painted the walls white, and along the area where people stand against it was all black. And I thought, oh, that's my first experience of seeing the rub off on the wall, and him not being, upset by it at all, just going, yes, I mean, it was going to happen. I was always very young when rival sound systems would have, dub plate clash, where you see dub plate fly across the room and not really know what's going on, but know that somebody's not really happy with the other person, and hearing rhythm and hearing sound I got dead, sound man I got dead, but this just normal rhetoric for me. But now listening back to some of those dub plates, which I still have on 10-inch, how dead they just sound awful. Just like, but I obviously the time has gone on, but realizing that for myself, I've embodied all of that. And now I'm getting a chance to create my own history, or herstory in a sense. And in doing that, and in, being invited to play by people such as Michael and meeting Nzinga and Sister Culture, and then listening to all these stories from the 80s and going, actually, we stand on the shoulders of giants. And so the first conference we were a part of was Sound System International in, I think, 2014, 16. And taking a moment to just recognize who was in the room and asking them for the space to speak about sound system, because they may not have had it. We know we've got it, but we are a younger generation, and we're asking for different things. Like, we're asking for payment, or we don't move a box or a wire or anything. We don't move anything at all. And so setting the sound system up as a business has been something that we wanted to achieve without even knowing we wanted to achieve that. So the intention, I think, is the same, wanting a space where you are in control of the music. If you want to play girl tune, you play girl. If you want to play badman tune, you play. It's up to you. There's a bigger conversation that is happening that we also need to be a part of.
Yeah, I wanted to respond to Yassmin's talking about a wallpaper piece that I made in the mid-1990s. It's a wallpaper using blind emboss, which is where you have slightly raised text. The piece was, if you went into the room, if you went into the gallery, you might not see that there was anything on the wall, because the wallpaper was white, and it was just this very slight raised text in the paper itself going around the room. The piece is called Lovers Rock, and I'd used the song Hurt So Good by Susan Cadogan. I remembered the song just walking down the road, and I hadn't actually heard the song since the 70s. It came out twice. It came out in the early 70s, and then it came out in the early 80s, or the end of the 70s into the 80s. And it was a song that I used to sing with all my school friends. We would be dancing and singing at the bus stop, singing this song. And because I hadn't heard it for ages, I don't know what it was that had triggered my memory of it. And I started singing it to myself, and realized that I remembered the entirety of the song. And actually, this was the kind of the beginning of the journey for me to be thinking about women and music, but also those kind of cultural references that I wasn't really seeing anywhere. One of the things about making the wallpaper was this question about it being against the wall. And it was, the evidence of it was kind of almost like the wallpaper was this kind of sensual thing, but you wouldn't see it unless you noticed that there was something there. And then the idea was that you would walk around this space, and it was like verse, chorus, going around the room, that you would start to maybe sing it in your own head, because you couldn't, it was just very, very slight piece. But it was the thing that started me off thinking about the music that I'd grown up with and had grown into, and how it was very difficult to grasp anything outside of my own personal experiences that acknowledged that that was culture. This was my first entry into thinking about not only about the kind of music, but also the memory of performers. And one of the things that I found really interesting in the devotional project, which came much later, was that particularly in terms of reggae music, Susan Cadogan's Hurt So Good comes up in most of the anthologies. She's one of the few women that come up in the reggae anthology music, kind of CDs, LPs, and it's always that song. So I find that really curious that all these other, there's a much broader, wider range of women practitioners, but it always falls on to that one particular track. It's a song that is in that kind of female tradition of, oh, my man did me wrong. I mean, for me, there's a lot of sadomasochism in that song, while it sounds sweet at the same time. Whenever I'm watching documentaries about hip hop, that they never mention the centrality of what was going on within sound system culture and toasting over records, and it's never even mentioned. And so for me, that whole cultural scene of not only a kind of challenge, but also speaking directly to the audience, and the kind of call and response is something that is a really diasporic experience. It was that emerged out of the 70s.
I wanted to pick up on what you were saying before about Hurt So Good, Sonia, and thinking about the way that the song, I really completely agree with you that the song is very sadomasochistic in many ways, and that there's this fine line between kind of what is pleasurable and what is painful, and that you're always sitting in between that space when you're listening to that song. In my book, I do look at the way Susan Cadogan was performing on Top of the Pops, but there's a kind of different history around the genealogy of that song, which is always quite fascinating to me, which is also the way that it was a Millie Jackson song. The way that she performed this song is a very different type of performance. So Millie Jackson owns her performance as this kind of really sexually powerful, in patriarchal terms, she's kind of an aggressive form of sexuality. What we see also from that is the way that the song also is performed by Jimmy Somerville later on in the 1980s. The pleasure of that song takes on different meanings through different performers. That balance between what is pleasurable, what is painful, this is also the way in which we think about lovers rock music as navigating what it means to practice or to be involved in forms of particularly heteronormative types of love, a kind of really dubious tension. I think that's part of the lovers rock experience in some way.
Some sexual themes that seem to be coming out of what everybody's saying, what I'm hearing. When Yassmin, you spoke about, you used the phrase contestation of space, and I think also Carol, you know, the way women would occupy the space in the dance hall. You also spoke about, you know, the wallpaper, kind of focus on space and how people inhabit space. Again, this kind of idea that I'm kind of trying to think through, like how women make themselves present, right, in the terms of presence, but also points to something that, for me, that Lisa was talking about in terms of the way lovers rock really kind of, in a sense, put the sexual politics of the dance hall out there, but not, it didn't articulate it overtly, but now we can look back now and we can see that more obviously, because, you know, we could talk about lovers rock and it's about this kind of romantic thing and all these contradictions. I think my work has been really interested in how those sexual politics, it's a prime location, sound system culture is a prime location for very complex forms of Black gender and sexual politics that don't get really discussed anywhere, so they get played out in this space within the culture, but we find it difficult to kind of take them outside of that space and really Black men and women have a real conversation about this stuff. For me, in my work, was situated as part of a broader project that I produced in my book in the end on Black women and freedom, and how dancehall culture is this space in which there's these contestations over power, regulation, all this sense that, you know, there are these rules about how you conduct yourself. So that's the thing that kind of I'm picking up across the different things that people are saying. I'd kind of like to hear some more about what people feel about that sexual politics that's going on, the gender politics in the space of sound system culture.
So on a personal level, when I was starting in music, I actually avoided going into the reggae music and I went into soul and funk and jazz, specifically because of experiences of friends and colleagues in terms of harassment, sexual harassment, a whole load of stuff. I wanted to add another dimension into this sexual politics. Going back to the Cadogan song, you know, the way Millie Jackson does it is really different to Susan Cadogan. If we look at it sonically, acoustically, lovers rock particularly privileges high voices. Okay, you do not get deep, gravelly female singers doing lovers rock. And that's interesting because for me, it's a kind of infantilizing of women, that there's a kind of prescribed range for the female voice, and that's where it sits. And if you don't have that, then it's not lovers rock. And then there's the whole thing about the really quite prescribed behavior what you do with your body in that space. If it's Sister Culture, if it's Lorna G, whoever it is, Sister Nancy, they broke that, but there hasn't been a massive legacy from that. I suppose my question is, what is the legacy? Is there a legacy? If you think about, in film, we talk about the male gaze. We have to think about male, I don't know what you want to call it, but, their ears. It's about their ears. When I decided I wanted to do sound engineering, it wasn't because I wanted to be a sound engineer. It's because I was in this other space, which is called a studio, with all this equipment, and I needed to have meaningful conversations with men about what sound I want to hear. And as a woman, you are excluded from that if you cannot engage with that interaction with a level of knowledge. We present an image, don't we? But it's in sound.
One of the key points to note around the history of how Lovers Rock gets documented and written about, and then you have these very young girls, in fact, they were young girls entering into the scene, as we know, 15, 16 and 17 meant they were 15, 16 and 17.
Yeah.
Louisa Marks supposedly recorded some of her tracks when she was 14. So we've got this situation where you've got these very young girls, teenage girls, who are entering into this production pipeline of singers. How much autonomy did those young women have? They're written out of the narrative, and when they are written in, it's written in as there's some iconic figures who are always written in. Carol Thompson will always be written in. Janet Kay will always be written in, and quite rightly so. They're written in as proxies for the producers, with the exception of Carol Thompson, I would say. There's a whole kind of gender politics, patriarchal politics there, on the back of the Lovers Rock being seen as this very gendered female form of music.
What's been interesting, particularly about Carol Thompson and Janet Kay, is that they have a huge market in Japan. And part of me wonders whether that wider international market for Lovers Rock has been what has sustained their careers, because they can draw big numbers to their concerts. And I just wonder whether that has had any impact on the longevity of their careers, where so many of the women that have been performers within Lovers Rock, sound system culture, it's really difficult to know what sustainability might have looked like.
That's such an important point, and it seems to relate back to Carol's point about legacy as well, because there is a way in which the women in Lovers Rock don't seem to have had very long careers. They've been kind of expendable, in a sense. And we get the revival. I mean, the revival now of Lovers Rock concerts is very interesting. And the way that still remains very gendered, and the audiences are very gendered. But as you were saying, Carol, the instigators of that seem to be those people who managed to sustain themselves outside of the UK, which then begs the question about why they couldn't sustain their careers in the UK. But also, Carol, your point about legacy. And you spoke about those women, the women you spoke about as breaking this kind of mold of a certain kind of black respectability politics that kind of governed the dance. And I think Lovers Rock was part of, so you had these young girls were included, and I can remember wearing the clothes, you had your long skirt halfway down to your calf. We didn't dress in a very sexual way at all. So there was a bit of a Rasta aesthetic in there. So that, so there was this romantic music, but and although there's a lot of sexuality in the Lovers Rock couple dancing, there was a kind of containment of women's sexuality. And then you have these other artists who come in and broke that. And I think, and I'm just wondering, I'm going to throw this out as a question, I suppose, in thinking about legacy. They introduced a kind of form of empowerment, and a kind of spoke to the real power that Black women do have in Black, particularly Caribbean communities. The nature of the music changed, and we had the move towards ragga and bashment, with a much greater shift to a very explicit form of eroticism and hypersexualization within the space of the dance hall that seemed for a while to be a space of empowerment for women. But it seems as the years have gone on, since the early ragga days, that's been kind of usurped by the masculine space of dance hall, the domination of men in the dance hall. It feels as though some women's attempt to break through those respectability politics and to celebrate their own eroticism has become assimilated or reabsorbed into, again, a male conversation.
We can't see any of this, sound systems, reggae music, lovers rock, outside of what else is going on in society. So if you think about second wave feminism, you talk about a rollback, things going back instead of forward, and you were very contained and there was a very clearly prescribed things that you didn't do. And then we come to where we are now, the dancehall queen and passa passa, where men are dominating in the space again. Where is the legacy of women who are leading or running or owning sound systems? Where are the toasters? Where are the selectors? Where are the operators? It was that kind of legacy as much as anything in terms of what goes on. And I find reggae music is almost sometimes a bit impervious, because you can find women DJs, women sound people in other genres of music, but there's something still quite rigid within the reggae music industry, whether it's in the Caribbean or here. It really does curtail what women can actually do in that music. Women have gone forward and set up labels and own this and, you know, produce that. Reggae seems very rigid around that. Why is that?
I was going to ask the question for both Carol and Yassmin. In your own practice, have you ever been invited to clash with another sound, line up with some of the big, what we might say as big names, you know, the household names of UK sound systems? So in Birmingham, there's a sound system called Female Connection. Two women who also broadcast on local pirate radio stations, but they also have their own system.
I was involved in clashes, probably not Coxon and them people, but, you know, your Maccabees and Clifton and some of the Midlands big sound systems. And I can tell you, me and my friend Wendy, we would have to steel ourselves and literally psychologically G ourselves up to go out there, because there's this sort of gladiator aspect to this. It's very competitive. It is very male. You're supposed to score points. We in the sound system initially, how we got in was through our singing. You know, we're going to sing over this doublet and we're going to kill off the other sound because they ain't got singers as good as us. But both Wendy and I was into licks and rhythm and had been inspired really by Sister Nancy and wanted to take the mic. And so we would stand there in the circle, and at first they would ignore us and never pass it to us. And then we'd have to literally assert ourselves into this ring and get the mic. And then when they saw we could actually put some lyrics together, they were like, oh, wow, yes, this makes this sound so much better than any other sound. But, you know, we had a lot of accusations. Are they lesbians? What kind of woman them there? What am I do upon a song? Oh, the man. And we had a lot of negativity about being women on the sound, but we just had to blank all that sort of thing out and literally fight for the space.
I'm going to jump in there. We've never been invited for a clash, but we've always put it out there that we are ready for a clash. Okay. I think the thing with us is learning from our father what 7-inch to play after the 7-inch that come before, how to play it, where to cut it, when to wheel it. It's not just about putting a record on the turntable, but you get kudos if you then don't have a middle and you use your finger. You know, if you drop one 7-inch on top of the other 7-inch, you know, it's those kind of, how quick can you do it? How effective can you be? Can you round robin? And I think this is something we developed. If one of my sisters said that, you know, I'll be back in a minute, who's going to jump in? Who can then take the mic? It's that kind of thing. So it's not just about having one role, but it's also knowing what the cogs of the wheel, how they work. So going back to the clash, I've realized over the last maybe 5 to 10 years, you don't actually have to have a sound system to have a clash. You can just have a box of records. You can just have a laptop. So it's this kind of, well, what clash are you talking? I think also in the last 5 years, we've discovered many more sound systems that are all females, like Kaya from Luton, obviously Nzinga, Rusty Rebel, I believe, even Rasta Queen. And Rasta Queen is Lovers Rock champion, but it's not because of what she's playing on, it's the music that she's playing. So for me, I then ask, well, what is the clash about? It's just tune for tune. But you can kill a man with a tune if it's a special. If you get Bunty Killer or somebody to make a tune for you, that's really it. They don't want to hear dub plates. They want to hear records that they know with lyrics that they know. There's a kind of returning to the art of playing music, balancing your set, knowing how to cut out, knowing when to drop in. I think there's really something about the amplified sound and how you play it. And knowing that if you're playing a CD, it's going to be completely different to a 12-inch, completely different to a 7-inch. And how do you mix between all those different technologies? And especially if you have someone else playing on your set, they're coming with Serato, they're coming with laptop, all this kind of stuff that you have to be able to switch on and know which phono to plug in, which phono, you have to know all of that. That for me is sound system. But what I am seeing is, women with a case of records, which is empowering as well.
Yes, but can I ask you, I just want to pick up a couple of things. You said you had your father to teach you all that technical stuff. Maybe the men are just not willing to share this with women. When you pose the question, what is the clash? And it's very much a kind of, to me, a very macho performance between men. The dance hall is a place that also regulates black masculinity and reinforces certain kinds of black male performativity, because that doesn't happen in isolation from women, also regulates women as well. So I'm just wondering, to what extent not only are men not passing on some of their technical skills, but also whether they're holding on to that space of clashing as this male gladiatorial arena that they don't want women in.
Just responding to Yassmin, we were seen as the new gen because we were very technical in the sense that we had a lot of power, and it was well EQ'd, well calibrated, and we had this, women in the crew, but we had a very diverse selector. We would mix up jazz with reggae and all that. We would come real left field. The technical is always important because there'll always be men who are on about, how heavy and how loud that sound is. But for us, it was also the preamps and how we could really make the clear distinction between the tops, the mids and the bottoms. So it was crystal clear. And then we had to make sure the mic was crisp. We've got women on the mic. Me and Wendy were talking about the things that we wanted to talk about. We weren't talking the chat that the men were talking about because, we'd heard Sister Nancy talk about her struggles and the attacks and the negative things that she drew simply by being a Jamaican MC. I know sound systems today are incredibly technical because we've had the Japanese and others who have sort of brought this high level of technicality. But in some ways, it's still very much a strongly male space.
And dancing is the gladiatorial arena for women.
And it's how limber, how much you can skin out. I mean, I was talking to Lantoinette Steins about dance or passa passa, all this daggering, all those kind of moves. It's practically gymnastics.
Yeah.
But also one of the things, the kind of elephant in the room here is how much rubber dub, how much man and woman dancing together is going on. Is that on the wane as it is in other music genres and club culture, or is that still only happening now in the revival night with a certain generation? Are younger people still rubber dubbing together? That's a question.
Apparently not.
So we have this polarization between the genders nowadays with younger people, whereas in my time, you're really hoping someone's going to ask you for a rubber dub and you're going to wear away the wallpaper or whatever. But today there's this polarization between men and women and they take their space.
Apparently, young people don't do that kind of couple dancing. But what they're doing is this kind of much more commodified version, this sort of almost strip club type of dancing. Sort of they rubbing their backsides, man's crutch. They're not face to face. What is that telling us about black love, black intimacies, particularly in the UK?
One of the things I've been thinking throughout all of our conversations is the kind of melancholic side of being in a dance and being female and waiting to be picked. Probably that sense of anxiety and lack of confidence in some ways that led me to lots of jazz and funk and other kinds of where I could dance in a completely different way. But for me, being in that specific kind of reggae culture was about having to wait to be picked. And I could not stand it.
I hated it. Give me a turnaround dance anyway, you know, where the woman asks the man to dance.
I remember women who hadn't been asked to dance holding whatever they were drinking to their forehead and having this kind of cyber dance, like he wasn't even there. And it's almost like the alternative is I can dance by myself, actually. I don't need you to ask me for a dance. And then in addition to that, I went to something maybe 2 years ago at the West Indian Cultural Centre. And I remember my elbow being touched and going, oh God, no, I just don't want to. Knowing that, you know, there are plenty of us in the room and that someone somewhere would have accepted that dance. It didn't help that I was with my mum and all my sisters, and my mum is Rasta. And I just thought, my mum is, you must be crazy. You know, I know I was made from Lovers Rock. I totally get it. I don't dance Lovers Rock. No, not for me.
And just to go back to the question of the demeanour, the clothes, the waiting to be asked. One of the things that, if I think about that kind of period in the late 70s, mid to late 70s, early 80s, is we all dressed like Princess Diana became. Do you know what I mean?
Yes,
true.
That's
it. You know, the kind of
Princess Diana.
really constrained, despite what was actually going on in those dances, in those spaces.
And you had to be a lady in the dark, a lady on the street, and a freak in between.
Yeah, but being a freak against the wall, not between the sheets. And of course, for me, this is where, you know, going to, you know, funk, disco. I was really interested in punk at the time, but going to these other spaces and wearing something completely different in those other spaces, because there was this space where you didn't have to be male or female in some of these other spaces. There was space to play with the possibility of being all of those things. Trying to come back to the politics of gender and race and sexuality in the context of both sound system and, you know, blues or lovers rock. Just kind of thinking, and I'm not trying to deny the kind of liberatory moment of being able to be sexual as well as in a kind of collective space, as well as being, you know, the kind of reverie that can come with that space. But it being so codified, you know, you could not go into those spaces looking ambiguous.
Sonia, I was going to ask, do you think there's something there about also the role of Christianity in the church and faith practices that are being, you know, that were very prevalent at the time? You know, you had Rastafari, and if it wasn't Rastafari, it'd be Pentecostal. My dad was a Rasta, and my grandmother was a Pentecostal prayer warrior, and so between those two faith traditions, there was a very strong conservative presentation, even though, like you said, there was this kind of liberatory discourse that was coming from Rastafari. And there has been also some work around the way in which Rastafari offers a space for Black liberation, but is also kind of wedded to some very Victorian ideas about respectability and gender and sexuality. That circulation of what aspects of the culture was it impacting on lovers rock music. And I certainly think Christianity and kind of gospel, church, the culture of going to church, all feeds into that, the fashion of that period as well.
I would add, though, that within whether one's speaking of Rastafarianism or Pentecostal Christianity, in a way we've kind of been skirting around this. You know, the Madonna or the whore. In some ways, these are very old feminist discussions. You know, that one has to kind of navigate somehow this, again, another dichotomy.
I'm thinking about Black women's sexuality has been curtailed down the age. I mean, you know, the idea for Black women in the diaspora, Black women, you know, even Black women on the continent, our sexuality and our sexual expression has been strictly curtailed, you know, and this is nothing new. So yes, in terms of my own upbringing, my mum never went to a church, but she made sure we did, and implicit in not sitting with your legs open and all these rules and codification are then carried forward into these dance hall spaces and what have you. The Black woman who doesn't follow those, as Sonia was saying, is the dichotomy: you're either the bad gal, whore, or you're the good girl. This is a horn of a dilemma that I found myself and many of the women I grew up with that we're on. And personally, I just rejected all that later on because I wanted to express my sexuality in different ways. And then I think about, well, how do people do that in the Caribbean, or how do people do that in Africa, even now, never mind then? Everything is controlled, and it's also controlled within this dome of music and music culture.
Part of the context is to do with the history. Particularly if we think in the Americas, but under colonialism generally, when Black women's bodies could be claimed and exploited by anybody. So part of the Black politics of respectability has partly been about asserting that Black women have a right not to be used and abused by anybody, you know, whoever wants to have a piece of her for whatever reason. So there's that going on, but at the same time, it's kind of also saying, well, Black men are going to keep Black women for ourselves as part of protecting them from that exploitation. So we can do what we want, but nobody else can, right? So I remember some years back when there was a big campaign about some Black girls had been sexually abused by some Asian men, I think somewhere in Birmingham, I can't remember.
Yeah.
Big fury. And so the whole rhetoric of it was not about what's wrong with rape, but it's about these Asian men did it. But I think in the context of Britain, if I think about post-war Britain, there was also a big preoccupation for our mother's generation of claiming a certain kind of respectability in Britain against white British racist stereotypes of Black families generally, Black women in particular as anomalous women, bad mothers, bad wives, or not wives at all, even worse. So I think, again, Lovers Rock plays into that kind of British racialized gender politics.
In Sonic Vibrations, the presence of Black women in dance hall and on the dance floor is further explored in Denise Noble's article, Give Me That Touch, Couple Dancing and the Erotic Gender Politics of Reggae.